Hello and welcome to An Evening with Nirvana. It's a podcast where I'm going to be talking to a series of guests from the Doom community and probably some people outside of it in the future. We're going to talk about level design, map creation, and other aspects of game development. I'm Nirvana, obviously, and my guest for this episode is Tourniquet, or Tourniquet, depending on which part of the world you're from. He's probably best known for his Cacoward winning mammoth Miasma. He's also the mapper behind Mutabor and Altitude, and he's also the other half of Ocular, which he made with Bemused. He's the master of nonlinearity, and he has a penchant for the color green, and we're going to find out a bit more about him today. So, how are you going today, Tourniquet?
Hello, thanks. I'm good. I'm happy you invited me.
Yeah, I mean, I'm
Let's
really
go.
glad to have you on. Definitely one of my big influences for sure when I first started. I was wondering, we'll start with sort of the boring question I ask everybody. How did you first get into Doom?
My first introduction with Doom was, like many others, back in the 90s. I didn't have a own computer until like 97. I only had an A500 at that point. But a friend of mine had a 386 or 486, one of these IBM PCs, and we played like a lot of these old DOS games, and Doom was one of them, and it was probably one of the most impactful games for both of us. We enjoyed it a lot, and it was really fascinating, and it stuck to me through all the years.
Yeah. And when did you actually start trying to make your own custom content for Doom?
That was around 2013 when uh, I remember I didn't play Doom at all for like 20 years or so.
Yeah, this is very common.
I,
Everyone seems to have this
my,
like massive break where they don't play Doom and then they end up coming back to it.
yes, so many other things and so many other games.
Mm-hmm.
I remember my younger brother at some point uh, got the I don't know what it called, the BFG edition,
Yep.
the Doom BFG edition, which came with Doom 1 and Doom 2.
Yep. Yep.
And at one point, I was visiting him, and I played it a bit, and somehow reminded me of the old Doom, but it's also slightly changed, and it didn't feel exactly like the game I played. But when I came home a few days later, I bought myself the classic edition of Doom 2 and started playing with it.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoyed it a lot and feel like coming back to childhood in a way. And my real first contact or how I got into Doom modding was, I don't know if it was just a happy accident that I stumbled on YouTube upon, at that point, Ocoblock was still uploading videos
Yep.
on his channel, and he did a lot of Thunder.
Mm-hmm.
And I stumbled upon this, and I think the first video I saw was Map 8,
Yep.
and it was something I had never seen before. It just completely blew my mind, especially at that moment when the war's low and you got this huge cloud of cacos
Yeah.
coming upon you. It was just mind-boggling, and I just had to see more. And at some point, I started downloading the first mods. Thunder was the first one I played in this point, and I think for the first 3 months, I was more into playing, and I got a bit interested in speedrunning, maxing the maps on ultra violence.
Yeah.
This was like the first months when I spent with the game after so many years.
Yeah, I mean, that is a
Um,
pretty big jump because you said you basically played the original, like, iWads and then came back, and so Thunder was the
yeah,
first thing you
it's
played after the iWads?
it's the total difference. I mean, when you compare iWatch, it was just mind blowing.
Yeah. That is a pretty big jump in difficulty. So
Yeah,
you told me that you had played around with the editor quite a bit before you actually joined Doomworld and started like joining community projects and stuff. Um,
yeah.
was there like were you a bit intimidated to release things publicly? Like, like you'd only been playing around at home by yourself for a while, and then you found this big community. Did it take you a while to kind of actually release something publicly?
Mm, no, I already was aware of Doomworld. I was looking there. I think I registered at the end of 2013, but I was already there and checked for some stuff. I played some of the Slaughter releases, like one of the first things I became aware of after Thunder was Combat Shock 1 and 2 and all the Slaughter Fests.
Yeah.
This was one of the first things that I
Mhm.
was aware of, that I played a lot. Ribbiks came into play a bit later. I didn't check that much into new releases. I mean, 2013 was also the year when Ribbiks came out with Swim with the Whales and
Yeah.
Starday 20XX. But I wasn't aware of that at the point until the Cacowards.
Yeah, I did actually want to talk to you a little
Yeah,
bit about Rubik's later on because you did sort of end up
yeah,
collaborating with him a bit. But before we get to that, you sent me a couple of maps in the lead up to this podcast, and they were some of your earliest work, and I could like immediately see the Sunder influence, and you sort of mentioned it
yeah,
yourself.
Thunder.
Was a lot
Thunder
of
influence.
that like the scale of it? You talked about the skeptical, like the spectacle of it, and so really were you trying to sort of recreate that scale initially, rather than necessarily the challenge involved?
I think I'm uh, something in the scenery of Thunder with all these large, imposing buildings. It's something that I really like. It's somehow feel a connection in the way of it's something that appeals me as well.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know how to describe it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, Anyways, to get back to your question, if I was intimidated, I wasn't intimidated to post my first maps on Doomworld. It was more that I'm always somehow ambitious, and I like the challenge of figuring things out myself. And before I before I wanted to go public with something that is rather lukewarm or amateurish map, I wanted to get at least somehow the basics and become a bit aware with the editor and making maps before I would release anything to the public. That was my my main reason why I stick to myself and didn't release anything
Right.
prior to 2014.
Yeah, I think I was a little bit the same. I didn't. I sort of thought about joining community projects very early when I first got to Doomworld and stuff, but I didn't actually end up
Mm,
releasing anything proper until much later on when I kind of felt a bit more confident.
yeah, I know. I
Um,
felt the same.
yeah, I played your DMP 2014 map as well, which came a little bit after those maps that you sent me. And I think by that stage it seemed like you had the fundamentals down quite well. Like the texturing and stuff is really solid. The structure of the rooms, there's even like set piece combat fights and things like that in it already, which uh, is it seemed like a very competent release for something so early. Do you have any specific memories of that map, or not really?
Not that much. The only thing I can remember is that it was one of the first maps where I started playing around with boom features.
Uh huh.
Um, like invisible walls or invisible doors where you could like a force field you couldn't walk through until you pressed the switch and it glowed and you could get through it. And I don't know if I was already working with voodoo conveyors, but general it was one of the first second map I was working with boom features. It
Mm.
wasn't originally meant for the 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 Doom World project. What was it named? I forgot the name. Doom World Time of Death project. It was meant. It was, I don't know. I think it was part of like sort of a small release set that I was working on at some point. But I gave up on this and I thought, yeah, why not? I just dump it in here and
Hmm.
the rest was.
Well, you also released, I think it was the same year. That's what I have here anyway, but I've been incorrect about some of this stuff before. You released, I think, is it Aberrincula, which was map 21 of
Mm,
Mayhem 2048.
Mayhem, Mayhem 2048, yeah.
Yeah, and that's that definitely has a lot of the hallmarks of like what I associate with you in terms of aesthetics. There's like a lot of clever use of mid textures in there, fairly extensively detailed, and you also like it has that green and brown texture motif that I feel like I mean I definitely associate that with you after Miasma and Mutabor. Um, I was just wondering, like, would you have any advice for mappers in terms of defining their style? Because it seemed like you managed to do that quite quickly. What sort of things were you doing in terms of playing around in the editor at that stage?
I think I spent quite a lot of time thinking about defining my style, but this was actually quite a bit later. I think it was more in the time after Nova 2 was done.
Mm-hmm.
The main influence for me to really start working on something that isn't straight away trying to copy other authors uh, and doing something of your own was when I worked with Ribbiks. I guess we talk about it later at some point,
Well, this
but
was my next question, yeah, to talk about Anaemia,
uh,
which was the sort of Death Destiny inspired collaboration you had with him for Nova 2.
yeah. But anyway, about that Mayhem map, it was still more like copying much of the essence of Thunder
Uh-huh.
combat shot with a lot of intricate visuals, but in terms of gameplay, I had to be honest, some problems with making good. My early maps were quite detailed, but I always felt like the gameplay was lacking in some points. I spent too much time thinking about making maps look good, but less time about actually implementing real good or fun
Yeah.
gameplay.
I think that happens in stages with people for sure. Because when I started out, a
Mm.
lot of my mentality was this should look good first, and then I will figure out the gameplay. And then as I've mapped more and more, the gameplay takes more and more prominence, I guess.
Yeah, I think it's usual that you want to start making something perfect
Uh-huh.
uh, right away from the start.
So do you want to now, if you want to talk about making that map Anemia with Ribbiks, that was sort of what I wanted to get into next. Just talking about the process of making that map and what it was like to work with Ribbiks at that time.
Yeah, sure. Um, it was definitely one of the most happy accidents that I had in, I don't know, I don't want to call my mapping, I wouldn't call it a career, but it was um, probably a real turning point. Rubik's has been, ever since I discovered swim with whales and started 20x6, it was a real huge influence. It probably became a lot of my influences started with Thunder, Combat Shock, Slaughterfest,
Yeah.
but this later drifted away, and I focused a lot more on Rubik stuff. Um, at the beginning, it was quite intimidating because I don't know, I still felt quite amateurish in comparison to his stuff, and
Hmm.
I, I remember I was working on layouts, but wasn't really sketched out. It wasn't not fully done. Um, texture team was completely different. It was like a lot of brown bricks and metal.
Yeah.
So the first thing I did, I sent my map over to Ribbiks, and he said, "Well, it's all right. Looks quite nice. Reminds me a bit of Combat Shock, but I think we should change the team a bit." And he's suggested like 3 different teams. One was like a Gothic style. It was a lot of dark marble.
Mm-hmm.
Other was more like Bretonia, with a bit more green and whites and stuff. And the third one was one we ended up with, very red and black.
Yeah, the red
Red,
and
black.
black theme. Yeah.
Yeah, this one was the one I really liked the most. And I started after he sent me back I think he swapped all the textures, made the whole layout I had at this point, changed it to the new theme, sent it back to me, and I started expanding the layout. To be honest, with no real clue about gameplay, I just added random rooms at some point, and
Mm-hmm.
they were not really defined. And the process where we just swapped the maps back and forth. I think one of the most striking points was by the things that Ribbiks did was there were 2 different branches, completely unrelated, and he just opened them up. He just built a huge underground canyon area which connected both areas, both branches, and it felt so revealing. It was such a genius strike for me, something I never thought about at this point, and just showed me how much you can do with interconnectivity, something I didn't consider at all at this point.
That's really
Um,
interesting.
yeah.
Yeah.
The
Because
second thing,
sorry, I was just going to say that interconnectivity is something that I associate with you the most, and I think most people have come to know you as, you know, the person who puts that kind of interconnectivity into their maps. So it's interesting to hear where that influence began, and that it was with
yeah,
Ribbiks.
it was definitely Ribbiks who just hit me toward this. It wasn't really on my mind at this point. The other thing, I think this was the first lesson that Ribbiks told me. We didn't talk that much. I'm generally rather intimidated due to my not that good English at that point. Back in 2014, it was even worse. And
Mm-hmm.
so we didn't talk that much, and I rather looked at what he did and how he changed the stuff I made and made it so much better. Anyways, the interconnectivity was the first thing that he really taught me. And the second thing was how we work with contrast. He also told me a few times how much wonder you can, or how much you can do with contrast, and you can get away with a lot less texturing as long as you make good contrast. And this
Yeah.
was probably the second and another lesson. The other lesson that I took from him and that I stick to even nowadays.
Yeah, I think contrast in the Doom engine is probably one of the most important things in terms of like learning that lighting is more of an aesthetic tool than necessarily about showing like actual lighting sources and things like that, just because of the way the engine functions.
Yeah, that's right.
So
So,
sorry, you go.
anyways, regardless of all uh, new influences and the impact that Ribbiks had on me, I think I was a bit overworked at some point. I mean, I was mapping since like the mid of 2013, and I did a lot of mapping. Not only the maps I released on Doom World, but all the stuff I made for myself, and it never came close to any publishing. Anyways, I felt a bit overworked, and Ribbiks by the time I was still working on Sunlust.
Yeah.
Also took a bit off from that map. So did a break for like 2 or 3 months, and I just got back to it and just fixed it, brought it all together, made like the rest of the map. Then I sent it back to Ribbiks. He said, "Oh yeah, that's really cool," and he applied some changes as well. I think he did a lot in terms of gameplay. I don't think I did that much good gameplay at that point.
Well,
Not the
the
most.
gameplay, certainly when I was playing it, felt to me very Death Destiny, which I know was a big influence on Ribbiks. So like I could see that it was obviously a Ribbiks map with in terms of gameplay.
Well, I wasn't, to be honest, really aware of Death Destiny at that point.
Mhm.
It all came a bit later when I did a bit of history research and Doom mapping. Of course, it became a bit influenced, but in case, sure, it might be that Ribbiks took some influences from Death Destiny at that point, but I didn't.
Yeah,
I
that's
think my gameplay was still pretty much just making something in
it's
terms of
still a
style.
bit more focused on aesthetics, but it's interesting to
Yeah.
hear that there was like not a lot of actual strict communication, that it was mostly this process of you just see what's in front of you and oh well, this looks like it should lead into this and I'll just add this, and it was a lot more of like a
Yeah,
natural kind of organic process.
yeah. I think I also tried to adapt Ribbik's style. I saw what he made and tried to adapt to him and make something that is somehow similar or comes close to it. It's probably also the reason why the map seems to be pretty consistent, despite being made by two authors.
Yeah, for sure. And so 20xd6 and Swim with the Whales, you'd played both of those already at that point.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah. How did the project work in terms of pairing people? Was it people were paired up, or did you guys just decide to collaborate? Or
No, 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 no. I don't know. I think it was still, I forgot the name, the project leader who initially, I mean, Dobu Gabumaro took over Nova 2 at some point, but Kildev, that's the name.
okay,
Kildev was the original founder of the project, and I don't know. I think he came up at some point. Like, yeah, it would be nice if we could some really experienced mappers who could help out comers. And for some reason, Ribbik showed up in the thread and was like, "Yeah, would be interesting to work with something." And I was the first who just posted, "Yeah, fuck yeah, I mean, I
wow,
would like."
yeah, that is a bit of a happy accident, isn't it? That's I mean,
Yeah,
I'm glad it happened
just posted
because we might not have had some of
posted
your
immediately.
stuff. Yeah.
I posted immediately. Yeah, man, I would love to work with Rubik's, and by surprise, nobody else posted. It asked for the same, so I don't know if no one was interested, or maybe I was just lucky and fast enough. But this was how it actually started.
Well, yeah, that's really cool. Uh, so let's talk about the big one, uh, Miasma. So
Yeah.
I'm curious what the beginning stages of that map were like. Did you know originally I want to make something very large and intricate, or was it just something that sort of spiraled out of control a little bit?
No, I wanted to make something big.
Okay.
Um, when I look back, it was after Nova 2 was completely done, and the next map I made was the contribution I made for Ultimate Doom in the name only, which to me was one of the first really good maps that I made because I took everything into account. I mean, it's a vanilla map, but it's I tried to make a good layout. I tried to add interesting gameplay, and in terms of visuals, you can't go wild in vanilla, but it felt like the real first good map that I made, where everything just fit together. I take out the map I took with Ribbiks because I made with Ribbiks because obviously he had a lot of influence, and so this Ultimate Doom map was the first good map. One I was happy with totally. Anyway, I liked the theme of it, and it was like a base map surrounded by mountains and a lot of nukage. And at that point, I played a lot of. I did some history research, let's say that.
Yeah.
I played Darkwave stuff. I played Death Destiny. I played BPRD. Sunlust came out. Sunlust was just a mind-blowing influence, and all of that kind of stick together. And the other influence was one of the maps in Nova 2, the one Mud made. I think it was map 15. It was map 15. Was just a large map, a large base map with a lot of nooks and crannies to explore. It really appealed to me a lot. When I played it, I said to myself, "Oh yeah, this is something I want to try as well." And this was basically the foundation for Miasma. I wanted to do a large interconnected map, just with a similar team like the team I made for this Ultimate Doom map, and together with all the stuff I picked up from playing Darkwave and all the other outdoors. So this was the original. This was the original plan for this map.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear that you went back and did all of this sort of research into like
yeah, it's mostly because Ribbiks posted some stuff about his influences, and he mentioned Death Destiny, and so I was curious to see how inspiration he took from him.
Yeah, probably Skepland as well, I'd imagine, was somewhere in there.
I played Skepland, but was a few years earlier.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Justice and BPRD and Darkwave. I mean, these are all real staples, and a lot of people name them as influences, and it's for obvious reason. These are fantastic maps.
Yeah, I think a lot of them, what's interesting about them, I think, is that a lot of them represent these sort of core, like, tenets of gameplay in Doom. So it's interesting to kind of, they're really good as, like, sources to draw from. So, I mean, I feel like if there are people listening who haven't played any of this stuff, it'll be good to get their names out there so that people can go back and play them again.
Yeah, that's right.
So you talked about the non-linearity in Miasma. I was wondering what your process was for that map in terms of figuring out the different routes you wanted, and is there like a lot of line like sketching on paper for that and actually planning stuff out, or?
No, I never made any sketches. I think it's a waste of time when you draw something on paper and then you go to your computer and draw the same thing again. Most of my maps I build a lot of stuff in my head. When it comes to the interconnectivity of Miasma, I just wanted to add something to the table, or bring something to the table that I enjoyed from other games. Before I came into Doom, I played a lot of Metroid and Metroidvanias. I played a lot of Metroid ROM hacks, and the interconnectivity is one of the most appealing aspects of those games for me. And I thought, why not? It would be a cool idea to add this into your own map. And I mean, you can do that much in Doom in terms of progression, like Metroid, because you don't have I don't know, high jump boots or stuff. You get a Metroid. There's nothing similar in Doom except for weapon progression, and that's what I try to at least implement and try to make some of the weapons not more hidden, and you would have to clear out some secret fights or harder fights just to get a better weapon arsenal.
Yeah, because a lot of Metroid is based around that backtracking of like you've seen something that you can't quite get to, and then you go around and explore, and you find some things that allow you to get access to that thing, and then you're like, oh, I can go back, and there's that little like aha kind of moment to it, which is really enjoyable.
I like this a lot. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what was your question again about?
It was more about your process of actually sort of building that non-linear stuff.
Okay. As for all of my non-linear maps, same goes for altitude and for mutable, is that I pretty much start in the center and work my way outwards.
Okay.
As for the planning, most of my planning actually happens outside of being in the editor. To be honest, I only open my editor when I have something I know I can build. I spent a lot of time in the early years. I just opened the editor and tried to build some rooms, but without any real idea or context behind it. And this doesn't lead to a good map, in my opinion. Fortunately, I have a pretty dull job, and I can often wander off during work, and I do a lot of my planning about what I want to do during work. And I come home and I got the time, I open the editor and just edit.
I think I do that too, yeah. But sometimes my memory is not so good, so I might have to like note a few things down and then come back to
it. Gladly, I have a good memory. I just when I have really good ideas next to my mind. Anyways, there weren't many key points of Miasma that were I had from the start on. As far as I know, I only wanted to make a fight in a canyon with a tower. Originally, I planned it to be a lot larger, as it ended up in the end. And the other thing I had in my mind was like this huge drop down where you would end up in this dark, techy, I don't know how to call it, this dark, techy underground basement where you would
Is that the
fight
cyber demon, the imp, the big imp fight with the plasma gun and the cyber? Yep.
I think these two were the only points I had in my head right at the start of making Miasma. Everything else was just came up on my head during the process of doing the map.
I think Miasma usually, like, people would say it's a slaughter map, and I mean that's definitely like it's a reasonable conclusion to come to, but I suppose I always think of it as being like fairly reasonable in terms of difficulty, and the monster counts in your fights aren't insane. Would you consider yourself like a slaughter mapper or a challenge mapper? Like, is difficulty a big part of what you're going for when you make maps?
It's not my main focus. I like Slaughter a lot. I came from Slaughter. It was one of the first things I played, and it definitely influenced me. But when it comes to Miasma, I also wanted to make something that was not only appealing to fans who like hard stuff, but also where a casual player could just fire up the map and still have a fun. That's why I also try to hide all the really hard stuff, or most of the hard stuff, in optional areas and hidden areas. A lot of the fights were also afterthoughts. I mean, the map was on at some point in early 2016, and like the green cave section,
Yeah,
it was actually a complete afterthought after the map was already done. I just thought it would be cool to reward the player with getting all the keys, so I just added this cave section, or like the other hidden section where you can get the second BFG, which is just ridiculous with the Archvice and the Cyber Demon. This was also just
Oh yeah.
an afterthought. I thought it would cool, and yeah, that's how it ended up in this map.
Well, I think sometimes those afterthoughts are that they can end up like adding a lot to a map. Like in terms of Miasma, the fact that it has so many, like a lot of what's great about the map is that there are so many little points of interest, so many things to find, little secret areas and things like that. So definitely a good call to go back and add that stuff in.
That's actually something I wanted to encourage players to just explore and find stuff. And I mean, you get rewarded with tough fights, but you also get rewarded with some, I don't know, some items, weapons.
Yeah, I think I've talked to a couple of people about this before, and I think like for slaughter people and people who like to make harder content for Doom generally, I think what we tend to like to do is make the gameplay itself the reward for the player, as opposed to here's a bunch of health and weapons and stuff after completing something. A lot of the time it's you find a secret and it's enjoyable to get this secret because there's more gameplay for you, kind of thing.
Yeah, I think Sul likes this a lot. He is always happy when he has another hard secret fight.
Yeah.
For example, yeah.
So I mean, I would easily put Miasma in my top 5 maps of all time in terms of design. It was a huge influence on me. Like I spent a lot of time just looking in the editor at that map and being kind of astonished by how well put together it is. It instantly establishes an atmosphere with the MIDI choice and the texture theme and everything. It's sort of iterated upon in interesting ways throughout the map. You don't just keep this same theme in sort of the same ways over and over. There's lots of different ways that you use color and contrast throughout. I was wondering what your actual process for detailing is. I know that when you worked with Bemused on Ocular, you sent him like an untextured layout. Was that the same with Miasma? Was it all completely untextured to begin with and you went back and detailed later, or do you slowly build sometimes your detail up?
The process has changed over the years. I think when I made Miasma, I was still making section after section. Sometimes I added something in the north, sometimes in the west, or whatever. And I also added detail. Making maps just with bare untextured layout was something I started when I made Mutable.
Oh, that's interesting. That's quite a late time to sort of completely change how you build.
Yeah, but it was also due to Mutable being vanilla compatible, and before I could focus on textures, I would rather focus on the problems with whiz planes and how much I could get away with draw sex. And the texturing was something that would came up later. In regards to Miasma, a lot of the detail, as far as I remember, there is less. I always try to make not many stuff that actually obscures the player while moving to areas. I prefer to stick to lighting. I mean, I think Miasma has a lot of layered lighting on the floor. This is something that I actually added at the last second. One of these influences I directly got from Sunmast. When you look at, it's not only Ribbiks, I think even
Danny does it a lot. Map 24
Dana
has a lot of very strange use of lighting gradients that look really good, but don't make any sense in terms of actual lighting.
It doesn't make any sense at all, but it looks just amazing.
Yeah,
that's something I just picked up from Dana's maps. And my general approach for detailing is I like it to be however how can I say, let me think. Nothing that could distract or hinder the player in his movement. So
Yeah.
better get away with some nice ceiling detail or some lighting on the floor, but nothing. You know, I hate bumpy floors.
I think I have a question later on, but I mean, I'll just talk about it now. When you were testing for me for Fractured Worlds, you were
Yeah.
my main sort of go-to person in terms of like, does this piece of detailing obstruct movement in any way, or is this floor too bumpy or whatever? Because you always pick up on that stuff.
Yeah, I think quite a few people actually consider it as a gameplay element to have these bumpy floors. To me, it feels more like off-putting because in the midst of a fight where you're surrounded by like, what, I don't know, 500 monsters and you can't control right, it's just something that can ruin you instantly. The other thing is, if you have any intricate wall details, it should be impossible to like step into it. Or it's the worst thing when you have a nice detailed wall and you have a Caco corpse that lies on a small, tiny ledge that is only used for
Yeah.
detail. Somewhere, I don't know, 500 pixels in the air. It just looks stupid. I don't like that stuff, and that's why I always point out when I play or test other mappers that it's probably better to block it off.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely I take it into account a lot more now after having you test Fractured Worlds, because I will now 242 off as much as I can. Although I do
Oh
think that
yeah,
bumpy floors, like, I mean, I have a fight that's based around bumpy floors entirely in map 6 of that wood, and I think as long as you're like, as long as there's thought behind the gameplay that's going on with it, it's okay. But you do get a lot of instances where people will just build something that looks cool on the floor and not think at all about it, which can be a real problem.
yeah.
I think it's also a port thing, because in GZ Doom you kind of glide across everything, but if they haven't tested in Boom, Boom is a lot more bumpy and more similar to vanilla, which
I don't know. I always stick to Boom. I never played GZ Doom, so
yeah. I had a specific question actually about lighting gradients, which we did touch on. That was uh, that was something you talked about a lot in Miasma. And it seems like a lot of the detailing in there, yeah, it doesn't really make sense in terms of lighting. Like,
it just looks good. That's the whole point of it.
yeah, exactly. Uh, but yeah, I suppose we talked about that quite a bit already. I wanted to talk about altitude actually, which uh is really interesting that you sort of went to make this after Miasma, and I was wondering if working with vanilla textures and stuff for that project was sort of part of cooling off maybe after creating Miasma, which is sort of very highly detailed and a bit more high concept with like a lot of sort of custom stuff.
Yeah, it was kind of cooling off. I wouldn't even just say it was cooling off. Um, After making Miasma, I mean, originally Miasma was planned to be a set of 2 or 3 maps, and at the end of at the point when the first map of Miasma was released, I kind of fell in a hole. First of all, it was somehow overwhelming for me to get so much big reception, so much
Mm-hmm.
good reception, and to me, it also felt like um, I didn't know how to make something that's similar without making the same again. And um, I kept on working on the second map, which was named Cascade or Cascade, um, which was even 3 times as loud as Miasma, to the point where I probably couldn't have put as much detail in it as in Miasma because due to the line limit. But
Yeah.
um, problem was that it felt to me like doing the same again, and I don't want it to um, just release another map, and everybody would say, "Oh, hey, yeah, that's another great map." But this time it's a red miasma, or it's a yellow miasma, or whatever color I wanted to pick. And Cascade was supposed to be red. But anyway, at the point I even considered calling it a day and give up mapping at all. And the only point I came back was because I remember Jaws in Space asked me to make a map for TNT Revolution. And it was just a plain vanilla map. It was something I made, I don't know, to me it was pretty quickly when I make a map in 2 or 3 weeks. It's almost like a speed map, and I really suck at speed mapping. I usually take my time.
Yeah.
I made this map pretty quickly, and it was just something I made in autopilot. I didn't think about it. I just made it, and it felt really cool. And I enjoyed the process of making a vanilla map. And so I got interested in vanilla. I made my vanilla maps before when I worked on Switch Room and Ultimate Doom in the name only, but I never didn't really have more enjoyment out of it than making any other map. When I made Altitude, it was kind of like a breather. To be honest, to me, it feels like the best map I made because it's a map that is not influenced by any others. I mean, it's a slight love letter to Going Down, to be honest, but it's probably the most personal map I ever made.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to figure out how far you can go with the limits of vanilla. And at that point, to be honest, I thought there wouldn't be much. I couldn't be much better, which I later, when I made Beatable, I put the limit even higher.
Yeah,
Anyways,
absolutely.
it was kind of something that I really enjoyed compared to working on Cascade, which had more like work for me, more like tedious work. And I don't want to, if I build something that I don't enjoy, I better give up for good. I remember I came back to Cascade 1 year later and picked it up for a while, but then I completely discarded thinking about continuing maps like Miasma. To be honest, I don't think I will ever make anything remotely as detailed or as huge as Miasma again. I'm really done with this shit. To be honest, I prefer to focus on vanilla mapping nowadays.
Yeah, it really does take a lot out of you. I mean, I've made stuff of similar line count. I don't know that I would consider my stuff to be as detailed as Miasma in terms of
I think your structured world maps have a really high line count as well.
yeah, there are a couple, but it I don't know. You do tend to just get tired of being in the space. Like you get tired of like being in the texture palette and the space itself and correcting these little mistakes, and these big maps. They really do kind of take a toll on you for like
Yeah,
after a
it
while.
can be quite exhausting. That's true.
Yeah, because at least if Fracture Worlds wasn't too bad because I could bounce around between maps, and I deliberately made those maps like quite different thematically for my own enjoyment in making them. And I think that helped a little bit, but Entropy for me was the one that was a bit of a drag towards the end, where I I got really tired of that palette and and just working on that map.
Yeah, yeah, I know, right? I can understand it.
Yeah.
To be honest, I never played Entropy. I think I wasn't around by the time. I usually take breaks from Doom World from time to time. I think they even get longer nowadays. But I wasn't around. I first saw when Sue played it, and it looked just too intimidating for me, too hard. I probably would have to save scum myself to it. But it's a fantastic theme. It looks really, really great.
Thanks for saying that. But I think by my standards now, it's probably a little overtuned in terms of difficulty. I think I was still at that point where I was like, I just want to make this like as hard as possible while still making it like
Yeah.
doable. But now I think I have like a sweet spot that I want to hit, and I think it feels a lot better in terms of gameplay for me personally.
Yeah, my personal formula in terms of difficulty is I have to be able to beat it myself. Unless otherwise, I won't release it. That's why I always try to never made any real. I mean, you can see some parts of Miasma are really hard, but I never try to really go overboard.
Yeah, my stuff's always been beatable with saves at least. I never did like a saveless run of Entropy, but Fractured Worlds was all beatable. Like it was, it
Yeah,
wasn't really FDA friendly, but it was beatable saveless compared to Entropy.
it's definitely beatable. Yeah, especially some of the earlier maps.
Yeah. So just back to Altitude. What I think is, and I mean it's in the name, but what's sort of striking about that project is uh, the level of verticality to the map. Um, was that, I mean, was that your initial concept for it, or was it more about like just breaking vanilla, like a sort of pushing it to its limits kind of thing?
I think it's a bit of both. I generally liked making city maps. I don't know where this comes from. Might be in the 90s when I had my own real PC. I don't know, it was like 96 or 97. I did a lot of like half a year. I did a lot of level editing in Build. I made quite a few maps for Duke 3D.
Oh,
It's probably my first time I got into level editing. I never was any good. I just tried to figure out some stuff and looked at some of the tutorial maps. But I generally made a lot of city maps. And I think this probably stuck to me throughout the years. Maybe I just like this theme a lot. Anyways, when it comes to altitude, the verticality comes first from the point that it's a city map where I wanted just my initial idea was something on the likes of being able to jump from building to building. I had to scrap these ideas a bit because there are just a lot of things not possible um, due to the limits of vanilla.
mm-hmm.
The other thing, verticality is also one of the one possibility to really bend the limits of the engine due to you can have a lot of planes on this planes on your screen, but as long as they're on different heights, it doesn't affect the engine, and you can get away with a lot more detail as you would when you had a rather flat or linear um, a flat map with less verticality. That's something I figured out during the process of making the map, and so in a way, it's both due to the verticality comes first due to being a city map, and second because due to breaking vanilla limits.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Mutable kind of builds on everything. It's sort of like a combination of Altitude and Miasma in a lot of ways, at least in terms of it's a bit higher detail and has a similar texture theme to Miasma, but then it has that verticality, and then you have this non-linear aspect to it. Was the concept for the starting it, because in Göteborg, if you start on a different difficulty, you're in a different position on the map. And was that sort of your initial concept for the map, or did that come after the fact, and it was again more about just getting back into that sort of vanilla space?
As for the different player starting locations, this was more of an afterthought.
Mm-hmm.
When I started working on it, I had the idea of making a randomized player start. Sounds impossible in vanilla. I just worked around with the problem with a monster controlled hallway, which would change according to the movement of a monster. There would be some parts that would close off, and it would look basically exactly the same, regardless of which path due to monster control was open and which one was closed. But it didn't really work out that good, or it was quite buggy, and the idea stick to me, and I don't know how I think it was just a random idea to work with difficulty settings, and it was just the easiest way to add this level of complexity without much effort. Of course, you have to do need a very complex layout where it works to have different starting positions without making breaking progressions or I don't know, get stuck in some points. But Mutable was a really open layout, and it worked completely flawless. So I thought would be a good idea to add these different starts in all the skill levels.
Yeah, because I was gonna ask you about because it's not like Miasma was non-linear, but Mutable is non-linear in a different way, I suppose. So I was wondering how the process was different. So it's interesting. I mean, it's interesting to hear that you did those player starts at the end rather than at the beginning, because I presumed you would have sort of planned these routes a little bit to begin with, but I guess that wasn't the case.
No. My general plan for Mutable was I wanted to make an really interconnected map with a lot of paths. My general formula was everywhere needs to lead to everywhere. That's how I started the whole progress. A lot of the way the map is built in very weird angles is more or less because of the limitations, and you can't get really large views. The engine would just crash in a second.
Yeah.
As for all this branching paths, I don't know, it's something just like with Miasma. I did think a lot about it when I was at work or doing something else, and then I just added the ideas on paper whenever I came home. And I don't know, it's hard to explain. I don't, I don't know. Maybe it sounds dumb, but I feel like I have like maybe have a good feeling how to make these interconnected areas. I
I
have a good
mean,
into
yeah.
how they work well.
It
And
definitely seems
that's
that
how.
you have a knack for it. Um, the color palette for Mutable is like, I mean, obviously very similar to Miasma. Was that a deliberate decision to tie it back to that original theme, or you said that Cascade that you were working on was going to sort of have a red theme? Had you played with
Yeah.
other color palettes and things like that before making Mutable?
Mutable was initially meant to be for other project, so it had originally a other team that was more blue and purple. And I mainly went away or tried to make it my own map because I wanted to add more ideas, which probably would have been not really fitting for a map in a map set, despite the point that it was a really gigantic map. And I feel better when I release something that large on my own, and the player can decide if he wants to play it or not, instead of having it, I don't know, somewhere in the middle of a map set where everybody who likes to play the whole set has to slog to this really long map, and in the end, he doesn't even enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer if the players decide for themselves if they want to play my stuff. That's why I wanted to make it a single release.
Um,
Uh, um, just that
yep.
I also can get away with much more things I would like to try and like to test that are maybe a bit more uncommon and would probably feel weird in a map set. And I like to do my own stuff. I mean, like for example, in Mutable, I added this HNTR where everything was just a really wild hit scan mode where you only had the chain gun. This is something you can do in the map set with other mappers.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
I
why.
mean, even playing with things
That's why.
like palette and stuff
Yeah.
isn't something that you can really you're sort of beholden
So,
to whatever the resource pack is for the community project and such.
anyways, the theme for Mutable was more of a afterthought. To be honest, I feel like the texturing in Mutable is quite lazy. I really wish I would have come up with more variation and interesting ideas. I did try out quite a few bits, but nothing really felt like it would fuse together well in the grand scheme. And so I just made it in the same fashion as Miasma, where I thought it worked really well. Just brown and greens left over everywhere, and it's quite confusing at some points because Miasma has more landmarks where you can orientate. So
Mm-hmm.
Mutable has like that, which is probably quite a bit confusing when you play it. But at the end, I just got even a bit tired of making, and I thought, yeah, I don't know, I just leave this texture team and that's it.
Well, I mean, I definitely did get lost a lot, but I think that was on me. more than the maps thing.
I'm I'm sure a lot of people got lost in that map. So
Yeah.
yeah.
I think I ended up finding nearly every secret though from memory.
Oh,
I did put
that's impressive.
a decent amount of time into looking around that map.
That's impressive.
So you talked about sort of obstructive like detailing and stuff and bumpy floors and sort of some of your takes on gameplay. And I suppose that you're not necessarily focused on challenge, but I was wondering with something like Miasma, which is maybe a little more combat focused than Mutable, I was wondering what your what it was like developing encounters in that map and what your general kind of process is for developing like actual fights, I suppose.
A lot of the encounters in Miasma can lead back to Stardate 20XX. I did a lot of I mean, when you can say like Thunder and Combat Shop were like the holy grails that brought me into mapping and started 20XX was like the Bible I cited from for many years. I even still it's probably the most influencing map set that I've played, and it's still the one I'm the most fondest of.
Mm-hmm.
So like a lot of encounters were directly a bit homage even towards Stardate 20XX without trying to emulate or copy the exact fight. I mean, if I look at the map I made with for Ocular, the final fight for the map I made for Ocular and map 2 is probably the only map where I just straight out joined stole from I think it was started map 4 or map 5. The final fight of this map is just a patent copy of Stardate map 20x6 map 5. Or I don't
Is
know
that
if
the
it's map 5 or
Nukage?
map
The
5.
Nukage fight? Is that the one?
Nah, not in Nukage. I'm talking about the Cosmo Loco at the map for Ocular. I made for Ocular.
Oh, I was trying to think of what the Stardate 20XT6 map 5 fight is. You're talking about the final fight of that map, or?
Yeah, it's like an L-shaped room, and I made this. I made the.
Oh, yep. I remember it.
Anyways, for Miasma, none of the fights was directly inspired by anything. I just take a lot from ideas and base concepts from Stardate. I just try to make something in a similar fashion, or I don't know. Probably the most influential.
There is there's
Map
a
set.
mastermind fight in Stardate 20XT6 that I always remember, and because it's one of the best uses of masterminds that I've seen. And Miasma also has a really good mastermind fight in it that I also reference as one of the better mastermind usages in a map. So now I'm wondering if that's why, because it was sort of influenced by maybe that fight.
Not as far as I remember. I think the mastermind fight in Miasma was I I don't know. The mastermind is always such a rather useless
Yep.
monster, and I always make something interesting with it.
Mhm.
And to be honest, the mastermind fight is my favorite encounter in the whole map. Just simply because even during my testing, I only had like a 60 or 70% chance to beat it. There was no real chance that I could beat it consistently. It was even a point of argument between me and Archie and Ribbiks, where Archie was really demanding it to be nerfed, and Ribbiks was just like, yeah, I like it. Leave it that way. And I just went with Ribbiks, and because I loved the fight so much and just left it untouched.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, it does sort of have that feeling where you not, I wouldn't say it doesn't feel like it's luck or RNG or anything, but it feels like if you screw up early in that fight, you are kind of just burned for the rest of it. Like you can't really bring that fight back.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
That's right.
But I think it might be my favorite fight. That fight and the big tower encounter at the end. Obviously, that's a really good one.
I don't like the tower that much for myself. It's a bit messy. It was even messier in the early versions that only the testers played, but I
Did
don't like it
you?
much. It looks nice,
I'm curious how much
but that's all.
testing went into. I'm assuming you went through and beat everything without BFG, because I remember
Um,
getting to that fight with only the plasma gun. And I was like, well, I think I got to go back and get BFG because I struggled for sure.
yeah, I tested without BFG.
Hmm.
In the first alpha version, it was even harder. There were like a ton of pain elementals that I removed later on. I think Archie really hated the fight, and Ribbiks had to really slog himself. He beat it in the end, but he really had to slog himself through it. So I thought, nah, that's too much. I'm gonna nerf it, and that's why I made it a bit tame.
Yeah, Archie's a good tester because he doesn't mince words. He tells you what he
Yeah,
thinks.
that's what I like. That's what I like about him the most. He is always deadly honest, and it's nothing I appreciate more like real dead honesty. I don't need any escassery.
Yeah,
I don't
it's
care if someone. I don't care if someone says it's good. I prefer more if someone has something really, really harsh or honest to say, which in the end makes work I'm doing better. And that's why I always appreciate Archie's opinion.
yeah. I think like like I was pretty selective when I sort of picked who I wanted to test my stuff, and it was generally people that I respected their maps or that I had worked with before and stuff, and who I knew like they would give me like an honest opinion on it. Um, and I think it's like pretty important when you're making stuff to have testers that you can trust.
Yeah, that's true. I see it the same way.
Yeah. So for Ocular, I definitely saw like a little bit of the ins and outs of that process. You had like a basic layout for Bermuda to detail, I believe, sort of a big untextured map.
Yeah, it wasn't a basic layout in the beginning. To be first, the the part of the layout Bemused got from me was I actually never told him this, but it's like 25% of Cascade. It's something I did
Ah, okay.
way back in 2015. Nah, not 2016. Um, it's just basically the best part from the layout. There was a lot more to it, but it was less sketched out, and a lot of it didn't make not that much sense at that point. But it was textured. I just removed all the textures before I sent it over to
Ah,
Bemused.
okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Um, yeah, I suppose in the same token as Rubik's, I was wondering what the collaborative process with you and Bemused was like for that WOD. Um, and because you already had that big structured layout, how did it work in terms of like was it similar to you and Rubik's? So you sent the map back and forth, or was it mostly Bemused sort of
No,
working on your layout?
it was mostly Bemused working on it. I mean, as far as I remember, I originally just dumped this part of the layout when there was a bit of discussion about a successor for Flotsam. I don't know. I forgot the name. Was it Jetsam?
Yeah, Jetsam was what it was going to be.
I just dumped it in there because I had no use for it, and used instantly sprung on it and said, "Hey, yeah, I want to work on it." And he just took this part of the layout, which was basically just two large buildings surrounded by a few mountains, and he started building the rest of the map around it, all the surrounding mountains. There was no gameplay, there was no texturing. He basically did almost everything. He showed me a lot of the progress. I tested it, and that's basically all I did. I really liked what he made. I was glad he had such an enthusiasm from the little bit of lines I sent him, and I think then Zool, or I don't know if it was Zool or Bemused, who came up with the idea just to join this map with the other map. I mean, the map that became map 2 was also originally done for Jetsam, and I really didn't care much about it. And then I don't know, it was either Zool or Bemused who came up with the idea to just combine them into a small set and maybe add some more. And I really like the idea for. I'm quite burnt out still from mapping, but for a short time it kind of sparked again my enjoyment in mapping, and I started working on something else. It didn't unfortunately work out in the end, but I was still happy that Bemused had quite a good time and enjoyed working on it. And it's in the end, it's all that matters.
Yeah,
Have a bit
I
of
do
fun.
remember him being very excited to work with you. I think for all of us, Miasma was just such a huge deal in terms of it's definitely one of the most like polished maps in the genre, I guess. It just every sort of nook and cranny of it feels like there was thought put into it, and I think like
Yeah,
that's what a lot of us appreciated about it.
I'm very like how can you say, very pedantic, very pedantic.
Mm.
I'm a lot more forgiving in terms of every aspect that could go wrong in a map when I play something from another author. But when it comes to my own work, I'm really, really ambitious and pedantic, and everything has to be perfect. There's no way around it.
Yeah, I
But
think
it's
I'm similar, but I think my process is maybe a bit messier than yours, and I end up having to iterate and sort of fix things later down the line a little bit.
yeah, maybe it gets better over the years. I didn't start out as flawless. I don't know. It sounds dumb to call your own maps flawless, but I mean, I did start amateurish just as every other. I just didn't release all my really, really bad maps. I was smart enough not to release them.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of started mapping with Doomcat 95 back when I was a kid, and there were definitely some real gems back then.
I don't know. I don't know about Doomcat. I wish I would have had access to a Doom editor back in the 90s. Would have been interesting.
Hmm.
But
It was horrible. It was a horrible program, but
okay.
it definitely taught me like the patience required for making Doom maps, because it just used to crash everything you did. You had to draw
No, so
everything. If you wanted to draw like a room, it had to be drawn clockwise, or it wouldn't work. You had to, if you wanted to draw a sector within another sector, you had to. So you draw the outer sector, then the inner one, and then you had to go over in a different mode. You had to go over each line again for
oh god,
the sectors within
that
sectors. Yeah, it was rough.
sounds very horrible.
You couldn't delete line defs or it would crash. You couldn't mass select things. You had to click on them all manually to select them one by one, so they would select
It's
together. It was awful.
old Doom editing tools. It's the same like with I don't know if you ever work with XWE, but it
Oh
was
god,
also
I
one of
did,
those
yeah.
that could easily corrupt your whole file when you
It,
did push the wrong button or something.
yeah, it was like the preemptor to Slade for anyone who hasn't used it.
Yeah,
It did sort of a
I
lot of
still
the
used
same
to
lump editing, but
I still used to work with it in my early years. Thank God we have Slate nowadays.
I think for a while it actually did a couple of things that Slade couldn't do, and so sometimes I would have to pull it out to do stuff, but like the functionality was okay, but like you said, it would sometimes just corrupt a file and just crash and destroy everything, which is not really what you
Yeah.
want.
No.
Um, I was going to ask about sort of theme in your maps, in terms of custom palettes and bringing in other sort of custom things. Like it's only a small thing, but like you change the chain gunner Miasma, for instance, so that he'd be green. Like you use a custom sprite and things like that. I was just wondering, um, in terms of that, bringing that kind of custom stuff in, how like important do you think those elements are to like creating a theme for your projects?
It's probably not important. I just think it's a nice element to underline your current theme. I mean, if you would take every monster and just recolor it green, it would look dumb. But it's
Mm-hmm.
like for the chain, it's a nice accent that just fits right and perfectly. Like Immutable, where I just recolored all the little health flasks and the megasphere and no, I think it was a supercharge. But yeah, like a few sprites with a fitting color, it kind of gently just helps building up a coherent theme. That's why I like it.
And in terms of palette, is that something? I suppose usually like you've used green a lot throughout, but uh,
Yeah,
do you
that's
usually use the vanilla palette? I'm not sure if there are any actual changes in palette. Have you worked with custom
I
palettes for things?
I just never really got into palette editing. At the point when I was just in my early days of mapping, I simply didn't like to make something that would be kind of a color rip-off with of Stardate or I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. I think I picked green because it was something that really is um, just fits Doom perfectly. It's something everyone can relate to, and it's just simple, and you can make some nice themes with it. I never tried any other color teams just because I don't know how to edit palettes, and I just don't want it to be someone who tries to rip off Stardate or I don't know any other color team maps that pop up nowadays. I just
Mm-hmm.
wanted to make something of my own.
Well, yeah, it seems like that sort of being original is like a big part of your mapping process. Like you said, you don't really like to make the same thing twice.
Yeah, it's not interesting to.
Mm-hmm. And do you think there's any likelihood that sort of Cascade makes its way out into the world, or do you think it'll continue to be maybe like picked apart for other projects or something?
There's nothing much to pick apart from it. Bemused already had the most detailed part of the layout. The rest was just basics. I don't know. It wasn't basic. There was quite a bit of detail and very curvy curvy layout parts, but uh, it wasn't really worth working on it. I mean, somebody else would probably say, "Yeah, it's great. I want to work with it," but it wasn't interesting for me, and
Mm-hmm. That's kind of the
I'm
important
glad
part.
Bemused did something with it, and that's fine for me. I have an I have a ton of unfinished layouts, and for some I can say maybe I want to get back to them at some point, so I try to hoard or keep them for myself. But in terms of Cascade, I don't think it's worth working on it.
Hmm.
And
And
like I said, I don't want to make another Miasma. I'm not interested in it.
mm, so do you think you've moved away from, because you, it seems like you sort of like these large singular kind of releases. Do you think now uh that's something that you like want to move away from, and maybe if you did sort of want to come back and make some maps, it might be something more in the vein of like a few small maps or something like that?
Yeah, I don't. at the moment, I'm still. I mean, I think I'm now away for like 1.5 years, where I'm not really active in the Doom community.
Mhm.
I'm still not. I feel like rather burnt out. I don't really, and I don't get me wrong. You made really good maps, but I noticed this when I tested, for example, Fractured Worlds. It's just regardless of how good the stuff is, I'm still tired of this game. It's just
Yeah.
not enough fun for me. And the same goes for mapping. I still have a lot of ideas in my head. I haven't opened the editor for the last 1.5 years, but sometimes I just pick up some random ideas and try to do some dehacked stuff. I'm doing a bit of brainstorming for a small vanilla map set, but it's not any close from being started working on.
Mhm.
So it'll take a bit more time before I really get back into working or releasing something.
Mhm. It's interesting how a lot of mappers seem to end up going back down that vanilla route, actually. Like Benjo Gami, for instance, going back and making Down the Drain, and I think Zol ended up making some sort of vanilla sort of map
I don't
with
know if
Zol bases. I think that was
Scotty's.
vanilla or something.
Nah, I don't think so. But it's cool as well. I don't know if Scotty's Sidonia is vanilla or if it's another
I
comp
think
level.
it is
But anyway,
vanilla company, yeah. But yeah, I suppose it's just interesting to see people wanting to go back down that route. I was wondering if
yeah. I mean, I haven't played both, or I think as for Zool, Event Horizon was the last thing I played. But as for Benjo and Scotty making their own map sets and being different and trying to make another large slaughter map or something, it's really cool. I like it. I think everybody should at some point try to make something of its own or something that he really feels puts his heart and his own ideas into it. I really liked it. I'm glad they both did it, release those map sets. It's cool.
yeah, I
I
think
hope
for Scotty definitely Sidonia is like when I talk to him, like just him getting back to his sort of Plutonia roots and stuff, and this thing he made in the
yeah.
background while he was making other stuff, and for Ben too, definitely that sort of whole vibe feels very very Benjo.
I haven't played Down the Train. I just saw Sweet Pea play a bit of it, but it's
Uh-huh.
really cool. It's some fun ideas, to be honest.
Yeah, it's. I think it's my. I think I said to him that it is probably my favorite thing that he's put out, which I was surprised by because I'm not a huge vanilla player myself. Uh, but yeah, I
Who
really
knows?
loved it.
Maybe you will come at some point. Who knows?
I think yeah, Ribbiks made a joke about it actually because a lot of people were making these sort of vanilla things, and he was saying that I'd be next and I'd be making some vanilla project before I knew it, but I haven't caught the bug yet.
Yeah,
I gotta make my
Ribbiks
E1 remake.
would be interesting to see Ribbiks make something vanilla stuff. But I don't think this will happen. I just tried to convince him at some point, but I think he's not interested enough.
I think yeah, Rubik's is he really loves what you can do with Boom. I think it's sort of the right amount of
Mm.
limitations for him, and he really loves playing with voodoo closets and uh,
Yeah, it's not only Boom, but it's also the stuff he discovers too. I think the most amazing thing he discovered recently was these exploding actors, where you can put them in a 2-for-2 and it's like an instant death sector. It's something absolutely amazing.
yeah. He originally he had that he released that map that had the sort of insta kill flaws in it, but originally it was a map for haste, I think. So that nearly ended up in haste that feature, but I think he ended up doing a solo release instead.
Yeah, but it's great he figured it out. Just as like those I I don't remember where he ended up putting the maps in where, but I recall he sent me an early layout with these where you could fire rockets into the wall and they would come back to you. I remember
Yeah.
when he was still working on that gimmick and sent me just a plain map. It was already
Um,
had this feature in it. Oh, that's really, really, really freaking cool idea.
yeah, Wormwood. I think Extended Universe is where it
Yeah,
ended up.
yeah,
Yeah.
it was Wormwood he made it for.
Yeah, that's a really
But
cool
it's
project in general. Both the original and Extended Universe for me was probably uh, I really love that map set, especially map 4 with that MIDI he made, and it's a really cool map.
Ribbiks videos in general are really interesting.
Yeah. Have you played Jump What at
Uh,
all? Actually, you just released that with Grain of Salt.
no, I haven't played any of the recent releases. I watched Derek play a bit of it. And it's a bloody amazing idea. I mean, whoever thought you would combine Super Mario with Doom? It's Ribbiks and Grain of Salt just did it.
Yeah.
It's fantastic.
I mean, it's just super unique, and again, it's a
Yeah.
testament to like his need to sort of break Boom down as much as possible. I mean, it ended up being MBF, but I believe originally it was Boom compatible. There were just a couple of things he needed that to make it function, and like certain things needed MBF in order to function properly. But yeah, I think originally it worked in Boom, and it's just crazy that he manages to get this stuff to work.
Yeah, a true genius.
So I guess just to finish up, I ask everybody the same question, which is I've had fairly different answers so far, but I'm curious what your favorite monster in Doom is and why.
To be honest, I can't give you a real answer to that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really have a real favorite monster. I think they all have their usefulness in some way or some degree, except for maybe Keen or DSS. But if I would name something, it's probably the worst monster to use, but I really like masterminds, and I always like to add a mastermind fight that is somewhat functional and good in my maps. I tried it with Miasma, I tried it with Altitude, I tried it with Mutabor, and I think it's probably something I want to try in later maps as well. So I don't know, as dumb as it may sound, but I kind of like the mastermind.
Well, I wonder if that comes from your Danny Babinga influence, because I always think of him as someone who uses them really well. Like Combat Shock has some really good mastermind fights where
maybe
they're really strong.
maybe it was a subtle influence, but maybe it's just a happy coincidence. I don't know.
Or maybe. Sounds like there's been a few. Well, yeah, thanks so much for coming on. It was great to talk to you. And I mean, like I said, you were a really big influence on me. Like Breathless and Entropy were both very influenced by Miasma. I in terms of like building those maps, I would a lot of the time just sort of go into the editor and look at sort of like Miasma in terms of ideas for detailing and how you use lighting gradients and things. So yeah, it was great to be able to sort of pick your brain.
To be honest, personally, I don't feel like I did anything groundbreaking. I just picked pieces from all the mappers I liked or that influenced me. I put it all in a pot and stirred it and made something new.
I mean, I think that's what we all end up doing, really, at the end of the day.
But no, sure, it's. I'm glad I could inspire in a way. Though I don't think I did anything that would inspire that much.
Oh, wow.
But yeah, it was nice to have a chat. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was fantastic. I guess that is it for this episode. So thanks again, Tourniquet. And we'll finish up here. So yeah, catch you later.